I'm your co-host Jack Pilata, and joining me once again is George LaFletch. George, how you doing?
Pretty good, yeah. In case you're keeping track at home, there would have already been three fights from the start of this podcast already in the Canada USA game. So, so there you go. What this tournament's been so much fun. Hey, everybody, there's a lot of concerns, and we talked about it a bit in the last episode, in the preview episode, about like the concerns about people um worried about like the level of competition, but like these players care. Like this is miles better. And even like when you compare it to like the absolute train wreck of the NBA All-Star weekend, where you had like Draymond Green on TV like calling out the lack of effort in during the game. Um, Man, the NHL hit this one out of the park. I think universally hockey fans need to be extremely appreciative of this, and it's going to suck when they go back to the All-Star game format. Obviously, I don't think you could do this every year, especially with the World Cup and the Olympic participation. But it's going to be really unfortunate to lose uh, this mid-season thing. I don't know how you replace it. That's a conversation for a whole nother topic. But the NHL definitely needs something in the middle of the season to get people excited, because this is like playoff intensity hockey, especially that Canada USA game. I mean, we're going to talk about it. That was one of the craziest starts I've seen to a hockey game ever, and yeah, I mean, the NHL needs to figure something out, but that's a whole nother conversation right now. As hockey fans, I think we should all be absolutely in love with this past week that the NHL's put on. So shout out to them.
I think it's been fantastic to watch. It's really cool to see all these players representing their countries and playing their hearts out. And that Canada US game was just so entertaining. And not only hockey fans were watching that game, that was just globally. Everybody was tuned into that. You heard people who never even watched hockey in their life tuning into that game. So I had fun watching it. It's been a great week. We have a little bit more to go. We have three more games, I believe. So
Two more.
two more.
Well, as of recording, when this episode comes out, they'll just be the final. But there's no like fourth place game or third
Oh,
place game, I
there's
don't
no
believe.
constellation game. Okay, I wasn't sure if
I
they.
don't think so. I have not from what I've heard. So
All right, then we got two games left. But the last game, which has already been finalized to be U.S. Canada, is going to be a gong show.
oh yeah, it's gonna be something insane. I'm seeing if I can find the NBA skills competition TV ratings right now, because I'm intrigued. I know the Canada USA game did, I think it was 4.3 million in the US. Um, I'm
4.4. Yeah.
curious yeah, I'm curious to see if the skills comp did better than that. There's no immediate stat. I guess it's too soon. Maybe it hasn't come out yet, but um, I got to assume it's got to be at least in that range, right? Like I can't imagine more than 4 million people watch the skills comp uh on Saturday night. So I'd be willing to take a shot that the NHL might have done better than the NBA. I don't have data to back that up at the moment, but I'll keep sifting through. Um, but yeah, I mean, what a performance uh, by the NHL, and that start was crazy. They talked to, I think it was Matthew. Was talking to one of the refs. It was Matthew or Brady. I can't remember which one it was. Was talking to one of the refs like a little bit later in the game, and the ref was mic'd up and just said it was just an organic thing that they kind of talked about right before the puck dropped, just to get the crowd into it. And that's how the first fight started, and then the other two just followed suit. And I think the image of Matthew opening the penalty box for Brady and then dapping him up as he skated in is going to be one of the most iconic pictures from this tournament. I think that one's going to go down in history. I said it when I was watching the game with my buddies, and that picture is just going to be it's going to live on. It's going to be maybe the picture of the tournament, barring something crazy in the gold medal game. But that was just such a cool image, and I mean, the game itself, I felt like the U.S. played it pretty well, perfectly. Um, they kind of exposed the concerns that I had about Canada going into the tournament, and obviously not having Cale Makar in that game was a massive loss. And as good as Team Canada is, and as talented as they are up and down this roster, I think maybe outside of Connor McDavid, Cale Makar is the most important person on this team, and I think that really was evident throughout that game, where Canada just really couldn't get any offensive juice from the blue line. And it was the criticism I had when the team was made was that they just didn't have enough offensive weapons on the back end. And without Cale Makar, I mean, Morrissey had to run PP1 and he was fine. Like he did as good of a job as I expected him to, but you could really see the loss of the hockey IQ and just Cale Makar's like comfortability playing with high end players. I mean, he plays with McKinnon and until recently Rico Ranton on that power play, and Josh Morrissey. Obviously, the Jets have some solid options, but I don't think any of them really compared to those two. And you could really see like just the downgrade there. And I mean, the second unit was just a mess. I think they had Sanheim run one of the units. They had Drew Doughty run it at one point, and it wasn't good. And the U.S. took advantage of that, and they didn't play a super flashy game, but they did what they had to do to shut down Team Canada's top guys. I think McKinnon, Crosby, and McDavid combined for 4 shots in the game, and 3 of them were from McDavid himself. So after that, the secondary scoring really wasn't there for Team Canada. And again, that was kind of a concern with this roster. But I think if the States can do that again on Thursday, things should look really good for them winning that game.
No, definitely the States had a plan going into this to sort of draw Canada out of the game with some fights and physicality, and they buried their chances, and goaltending was the difference in the end. Connor Hellebuyck over Jordan Binnington. Hellebuyck had a fantastic game, stopped a lot of those high danger chances for Canada towards the end in the third period. So before we jump into our main segment this week, what do you think Team Canada can do differently to overcome USA this second time around this gold medal game?
I think the big thing is just getting on them early. Obviously, they scored the first goal in that game. It was the McDavid goal, which was just electric. The Bell Center was on fire, especially in that first period. And then they just kind of like they couldn't break into the zone. They were forced to do a lot of dump and chase, and the U.S. really didn't allow them to enter the zone. I think that's the biggest thing for me is they need to be a lot more aggressive trying to get those zone entries. And although they did get a lot of like rebounds and stuff in kind of the high danger area, they didn't generate a ton of like quality chances from there. I think there was a stat they said during the Canada-Finland game that Canada had the same amount of shots from the slot in the first period against Finland as they did that entire game. So getting to the net is going to be the biggest thing. And obviously, I think the addition of Cale Makar to that lineup is going to be pretty significant. I don't know if that's going to be enough to get them over the top, but I think it's just you got to stay out of the box. You got to generate some power plays and allow that unit to cook. And it's something we really haven't seen. I mean, Canada maybe had one power play in this the game against Finland. They didn't score a power play goal, I don't believe. They had the one against Sweden, which was just an unbelievable play. That was really cool seeing the McDavid to Crosby and McKinnon connection on that. But other than that, we really haven't seen that trio get going, and it's going to be trying to figure out who they can get to play with these stars, right? Like it seems like they have McDavid's line figured out with Brayden Point. The rest of the lineup looked really solid today against, albeit a significantly worse roster in Finland, but it's really going to be just getting that momentum and not letting the U.S. dictate the game like they did on Saturday, because the States, I think the States played that game exactly how Canada wanted to, or how Canada built their roster to play this tournament, and the U.S. just kind of took that strategy and really took control. Like Canada's not a team that can really play from behind, based on the level of talent they have, especially against a team like the U.S. So I think getting a lead early and then just trying to lock it down is going to be the biggest thing for them.
Definitely. And I think too, having those defensive stalwarts on the back end for USA like Jacob Slavin and Brock Faber are going to make getting to those high danger areas so much more difficult for Canada. So I'm really excited for this gold medal game. However, let's jump into our weekly segment, which is going to be something a little different this week. We're going to look at some underrated players in the NHL this season. So we're just going to go back and forth. We each have 3 nominations, and I'll let you go first. First on your list is Dylan Samberg, a defenseman on the Winnipeg Jets, who's missed a little time this year with injury, but has looked fantastic as the Jets sit first in the NHL in points before this Four Nations break. What do you got to say about him?
Yeah, Dylan Samberg is just he's really the kind of defenseman that I love. He's very strong on both ends of the puck, and he's a great puck mover. He's really quick. He's deceptively creative when he has the puck, and even without it, he's able to kind of find some open space and lead breakouts fairly effectively. I mean, he's playing a lot of his time with Neil Pionk, which I mean, Pionk's numbers have been boosted up quite a bit this year, and he's been better than he has the last couple of years. So I got to give him credit for that. But I think a big part of that is obviously playing with a guy like Dylan Sandberg, and I think he's somebody who's just really underrated on a blue line. Obviously, he's behind Josh Morrissey, and then I know I really love guys like Dylan DeMello. And I really hope that the Jets continue to play him over a Logan Stanley. I know earlier in the year, obviously, Sandberg had some injury concerns as well, but Logan Stanley was getting a lot of those minutes, and it did hurt what the Jets were able to do as a blue line. And now that Sandberg's healthy, I really hope that he can truly kind of take over and be that option kind of in the middle to bottom of that defensive pairing. But I'm a huge fan. I think he's really the perfect my perfect model for what defensemen should look like moving forward.
Yeah, and I think too he's been more involved offensively this year, sort of shooting from the point for more deflections and tips, also finding some seam passes for some one-timers with the Jets have been using a ton of this year to really establish themselves as one of the top teams in the league. So really nice to see him run out his game. He's been an excellent sort of number 3, number 4 guy for the Jets, and I think that's going to continue for the rest of the season. All right,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'll go up next. I have, for my first pick, I have Alexi Protas of the Washington Capitals. Last season signed 3.4 by 5. And at the time, this deal seemed a little suspicious. He never really established himself as being worth this long-term investment in the bottom 6 despite his height. But he's looked phenomenal this season. He's got 46 points, which is 50th in the league, and 34 of those have come at 5-on-5, which is 10th in the NHL. His microstats profile shows high danger passes, center lane passes have been phenomenal. He's working on a line with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Tom Wilson. This is a massive line in terms of size. Spencer Carberry has also used them to sort of shut down opponents' top lines, and he's been really good off the cycle and off the rush as well. He can play in any scenario, and this guy is super fast too. He's almost like the unicorn-esque, similar to Tage Thompson. He's in the 93rd percentile of top speed skating according to NHL Edge. 62% goal share, 49% XG share, and 51% high danger attempt share. He's looked awesome on this line, and Spencer Carberry's got a gem for the next 5 seasons in Washington. What do you think about Protas this season? And do you think that this is an outlier year for him and we'll see some aggression, or is the coaching really paid off and the development, and this is a good piece of the long term in Washington?
I mean, I think at this point it's kind of hard to say. We're gonna have to see how the offseason and the rest of the season treats him. But I mean, the good news for him is he's going to be in the same system next year, right? Because Carberry's not going anywhere.
No.
This team is relatively locked up. There's not going to be a whole lot of roster turnover, barring like some trades. So I'm not like the environment that he's going to be in will be very similar. His role will be similar. So in those like controllable factors for the Capitals, I think they're going to put him in a place to succeed. Obviously, like it's hard to say year to year, but I think just based on what we've seen so far, he's been a very, very pleasant surprise and been a key part to a Washington team that has some guys who have braked out. I mean, Pierre-Luc Dubois has looked a lot better in Washington, not playing the role that I expected him to at the start of the season, but he's still been a fairly effective player. And obviously, you have Ovechkin, who's been really good and is chasing the goal record, and Strome too, who's also been fantastic. So overall, like I think you look at the Capitals and a lot of the guys they brought in, they have really helped that team. But I think obviously you have a player here that has been super effective in that role that he's been playing. So in terms of long-term longevity, I don't know. Like it's hard to say. I'd bet that he'll put up similar enough numbers the next year or two, at least until things change on this team and his role obviously changes as well. But for right now, it's definitely been a super a super welcome surprise for the Capitals, and you need players like that when you're making playoff pushes and getting into hockey in April and May. So he's somebody to really keep an eye on here as the season comes to an end.
Absolutely, and he's also grown into his size as well.
Yeah,
obviously,
that's a big thing.
As people grow from a young age and have unexpected growth spurts, he's sort of filled into that frame very nicely for Washington. And even his brother is up on the rise. The Capitals drafted him last year, so being a watch for Ilya Protas.
Yeah.
But let's move into your second pick. You have Thomas Chabot on the back end for Ottawa. Let's talk about him a little bit. What have you seen this year from him?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that points out, like, just when you immediately pull up his stats, is he's second in the league in goals over replacement. I don't know if I say he's been the second best player in the NHL this year, but there's something to be said about that performance just being up there, right? Obviously, and just the caveat for listeners, like, you shouldn't just go to a GAR page and assume that's the list of the best players in the NHL. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But in terms of his role, I think he's been once again one of the more underrated defensemen in the league, and he's somebody that I think gets a lot of unwarranted crap from Senators fans specifically. Jake Sanderson's kind of exploded to be the number one option for the Senators, but in terms of being like kind of the secondary guy, this is kind of where Thomas Chabot has really started to shine. And I think early in his career, he was taking on maybe too much responsibility, and that kind of hurt his development a little bit. But now that Sanderson's there and this blue line's really starting to round out as a whole unit now, for really the first time in his career, the Senators have had a really solid, like, 1 to 6 blue line. As long as as long as Travis Hamonic isn't playing, then the Senators blue line definitely looks a lot better. But yeah, I think he's really taken on that role of having less difficult minutes, but he's really taken advantage of those opportunities. Again, somebody who just he's been very good in transition. He's been very underrated offensively, I think. Even defensively, I mean, he's been above league average defensively, and that's something that I think has been missing from Chabot's game throughout a lot of his career. And he's somebody I've been watching for a couple years now as a candidate that fans seem to not like, because he will make some mistakes with the puck and he is prone to having turnovers. But a lot of those offensive play driving defensemen do turn the puck over a lot, right? So maybe the fact that he isn't putting up the same kind of points as like an Evan Bouchard or an Erik Karlsson from a couple years ago has kind of hidden his offensive ability. But I think it's a lot of the hate for Chabot is unwarranted, and that's the main reason why I wanted to highlight him, is just because I feel like he gets a lot of unnecessary hate from especially the Senators fan base.
Yeah, and I think he definitely fits better in that sort of good number 2 role behind Jake Sanderson, as opposed to being the guy on the back end. He signed that big 8x8 a few years back, and I don't know how many years he has left on it now. It can't be much, but he definitely looks more comfortable in a reduced role in Ottawa, and now he's starting to shine. He's in the top 10% of defensemen in controlled zone entries this year, and he's been a huge part of their play and transitioning up the ice in the Senators' rush offense, and he's been phenomenal for them. And hopefully the Senators sneak into a playoff spot this season. That'd be fun to watch. They haven't been in the playoffs for a while, so I'm going to move to
he has 3 more years after this.
Okay, 3 more years. So yeah, maybe he gets a pay cut, maybe not with the changing cap, but Ottawa's got him locked in with the salary cap rising, and they got a good back end too now with guys like Nick Jensen and Jake Sanderson back there.
Nick Jensen's also had a really good season. There's another guy you can highlight.
He's been good as well. Yeah. I'll move into my second pick now. I've got Marco Rossi of the Minnesota Wild. More of a undersized and hyped up draft prospect that we're finally starting to see break onto the scene. The Wild have finally looked a lot better this season after an underwhelming past 2-3 years. He's got 19 goals, 47 points, 48th in the NHL with 35 on 5 points, which ranks 27th in the league. He's controlled 50% of the goals share, 52% XG share, 53% high danger share. So he's been good in possession metrics. And this guy is phenomenal around the net. He's got 48 high danger shot attempts from in tight, and he's just been an excellent finisher for the Wild this season. And he's now moved into his third year of his ECL. And what do the Wild do next with a guy like Marco Rossi, who's a young and upcoming center? He was rumored to be traded for a while as well.
Yeah.
And they got Eriksson Ek and Rossi down the middle, who are two young, good centermen who can lead the charge for the next half decade or so. And then you have Kirill Kaprizov coming, who needs a new deal soon. And where do you see this Wild core going with a player like Marco Rossi, who is finally starting to emerge? And while they also have some aging talent as well, guys like Jared Spurgeon and Matt Zuccarello too.
Yeah, I mean the big question for Minnesota is what happens with Kaprizov, right? And then everything kind of falls from there. Um, Obviously, if Rossi is going to want a significant pay grade and not a bridge deal, it's going to be hard to keep both of them. And from the sounds of it, it sounds like Kaprizov's already wanting to at least test the market from what we've seen, or at least there's no like major intention that he wants to get like a deal done today. So I think you're looking at a situation where you kind of just have to hold out and wait and see what happens with Kaprizov. And if Rossi's willing to take a bridge deal, a 2 to 3 year kind of contract, I think you just sign that right away. But he's definitely somebody who has a ton of value. And if Minnesota really wanted to make an all-in push before Kaprizov departure, maybe we see a Columbus Blue Jackets type thing when they had Bobrovsky and Panarin, and they just kind of go all in and see what they can do for a season. Which is such a strange season, by the way. Can we just take a second to highlight how weird that Columbus Blue Jackets team was? But yeah, I think Minnesota could potentially do something like that where they just maybe make a move where Rossi's kind of a casualty and they just kind of go for it. But ideally, I think they'd rather keep him. And honestly, like long-term wise, I think signing him long-term is probably a better future investment than an 8-year Kaprizov contract would be. But that's kind of the domino that needs to fall first before I think they can make a real decision on Rossi. They need to know what's happening with Kaprizov.
Yeah, there's also been rumors about Kaprizov looking elsewhere in the future, potentially Chicago. So we will see what goes on with the Wild there, because this Wild team wasn't expected to have the year that they are right now. I definitely think they are more in the pretender category, which I'm sure you'll discuss on your team's tier, which you can probably find. George plans to do a separate episode on that, so make sure to check that out. But I don't know if the Wild will be back in this position a year from now. I don't know if we'll be looking at the Wild coming up in the 2026 trade deadline saying, hey, this team has what it takes to go all the way. So really interesting there. But Rossi's looked fantastic, finally becoming a player that the Minnesota organization hoped he could be. So let's move into your third player. You have Connor Garland of the Canucks. And man, it's been an interesting season for this Vancouver team. Why don't you talk about Garland a little bit, what you see in him?
I feel like Connor Garland's been a guy, and I think a lot of the negativity towards Connor Garland comes from, at least from Canucks fans, comes from the means in which he was acquired. Obviously the Oliver Ekman-Larsson trade, which involved moving, I think it was the 9th overall pick in that draft. Like obviously that's which I think was that was a Dylan Guenther pick, right?
Yes, it was a Dylan Guenther pick.
Yeah, so like obviously that's gonna because I think it's pretty clear that you'd rather Dylan Guenther over the Oliver Ekman-Larsson contract and Connor Garland. But if you take that, I mean that's not on Connor Garland. That's just on the organization making an awful move. But Connor Garland's like one of the better defensive players in the league. He's third in defensive GAR this year. His shorthanded numbers aren't nearly as good, but 5-on-5 wise, at least he's been extremely solid. And his offense really hasn't been there this year, and it hasn't been there for the last couple of years in Vancouver. And a lot of that I think has to do with the role that he's been placed in. He's somebody who's been on the trade market for like 3 years now. So maybe this is the year he finally gets moved. It was finally the time that Martin Necas got moved. So maybe it's time for him as well. But I really think a change of scenery could be really good for Connor Garland. He's somebody I think would almost work really well on one of these up and coming rosters rather than like on a team competing for a Stanley Cup this year. I think a Columbus Blue Jackets would be an interesting spot for Connor Garland. Specifically, if you wanted a piece there, I think if Calgary didn't have like 5 other players similar to Connor Garland, he'd be a really good fit there. But I think they're kind of too loaded on the underrated analytical darling middle 6 wingers. But I really think Columbus could be an interesting one. I just kind of like threw that out there, but fantasy booking that, like he seems like a really nice second line winger for that team if they're going to try to make a playoff push. He wouldn't really cost a whole lot. I think you can get him probably for like maybe like a 3rd round pick. And I think he has term left too, doesn't he? I think he has at least another year left on his deal.
Yeah.
So you're not just getting a rental too, and I think for a team like Columbus that'd be really interesting. So there's a little fantasy trade for you. I think it's a super good buy low candidate. He's extremely good defensively. So even if you don't get the offensive boost from playing him in a top 6 role, he's still going to be a very good controller. He's very good at shutting down zone entries. That's what one of his main skill sets from watching him. And he's somebody who plays defense in a way that you won't pick up on it because he's not going to lay like massive hits. He's not going to, block a ton of shots, but he's going to really be able to just stifle down and snuff out offensive attacks before they even happen. And I think that's what makes him a super valuable player and something that isn't going to stand out to like the average fan or even maybe to some scouts because he's not making those big like all-in plays. And I really think that he'd be very good, especially on one of those tweener teams. I think those are kind of the teams that should be looking for a guy like Connor Garland, a team that needs some support in the top 6 rather than a team that's going to trade for him and play him on like a 3rd or 4th line.
Oh, absolutely. Garland has been one of the more underrated guys in the NHL to this point, and even a team like Winnipeg could use a utility guy like Connor Garland as well for the bottom 6. I think they're one of the rosters and contenders that should load up on cheaper assets like Garland. So,
although I think they
really
need a
good
center
player
more
there
than a winger at this point.
Fair.
Because Vlad Namestnikov as your number 2 doesn't sparkle a ton of confidence for me, but it's worked so far, I guess. So I can't really crap on it too much because they're winning games. So
center the priority for sure. But if you can go out and add a guy like Garland for your 3rd or 2nd line winger for a 3rd round pick due to the salary cap, I mean, that's not a bad ad for a contending team. I mean, the Jets
especially with another year of control too. That's the big thing.
And the Jets have a guy like Alex Iafallo on the 4th line who, when traded with Gabe Vilardi from LA, wasn't expected to be this sort of 4th line role player, when more so he was expected to be higher up in the lineup. But regardless, he's made it work in Winnipeg. And I think in Scott Arniel's system, a guy like Garland could fit very well as well. So
I agree.
I'm going to talk about my last player now. I have Rickard Rakell, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who is also rumored in trades as well, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we jump into that, let's take a look at some stats. 25 goals, 48 points, 43rd in the NHL, 32 5-on-5, which ranks 16th, 52% goal share, 54% XG share, 54% high danger shot attempt at 5-on-5. This is a guy that scores goals this season, and he's more of a methodical kind of player, not the quickest in terms of foot speed, but finds those high danger areas on line with Sidney Crosby. And he plays a decent cycle game, but more so of a rush attack kind of guy. This is a very intriguing player for a lot of contending teams. Adding a middle 6 or top 6 goal scorer like Rickard Rakell, who can play any one of your first 3 lines. What are some potential fits that you think, and maybe a potential price tag you could see for Rickard Rakell at the trade deadline?
I think he's another guy that, I mean, the price that has been rumored has been a 1st round pick and a prospect. Rickard Rakell currently ranks 2nd in, I don't want to keep talking about goals above replacement, but I just have the tab open right now. On the Penguins, he's 2nd among forwards in offensive goals above replacement and 1st in defensive GAR. He is 1st in total goals above replacement by 2.5 goals ahead of Sidney Crosby. So, he's been really good this year. Needless to say, he's been fantastic on both ends of the ice. Clearly, he would be, if I was a Selke voter, he would be somebody I'd look towards just because of especially the way that they do voting now, where it's very much an underrated offensive player award. But somebody who's has a really good two-way game. Rickard Rakell would be a player I'd look for in there, and maybe he will get some votes. I don't know. He seems like the kind of guy that might. Maybe not because the Penguins aren't the TV juggernaut that they used to be, but yeah, I think a first and a blue chip prospect might be a little much for what he is, especially considering he's probably playing like a second line role on a really strong team, right? Like a lot of the top end teams looking for wing support aren't looking for first line wing support. And there might be bigger names out there too. I mean, Mikko Rantanen might be somebody who gets traded in the next couple weeks based on some of the stories coming out of Carolina. So who knows what happens there? But obviously, that's a significantly bigger name than a Rickard Rakell is. But again, he's under team control too, right? So there's that as well. I think he has another 1 or 2 years left on his deal. So that's another player that has term as well. And it seems like that's something that teams are more prioritizing right now, is that team control rather than just trading for straight up rentals, which is what we usually see at the deadline. So yeah, he's an interesting player just based on that. And I wonder how much his numbers might drop when he's not playing with a player like Sidney Crosby. That's kind of the one concern that I'd have using his underlyings is, and even his point totals as well, right? Is he's not, unless he goes to a team like Edmonton, he's not going to be playing with a player at the same caliber as Sidney Crosby, right? So there's few teams that can kind of give him that kind of support, and if you understand that going in, then he could still be a good player for you. But if you're paying the Sidney Crosby premium, which is what Pittsburgh's asking for right now, and I mean justifiably so, I'd say this is somebody that I'd kind of steer away from just because that's a little bit of a concern. But overall, I mean, he's had a really strong season. He's had a really strong. He's done really well since joining Pittsburgh in general. So you can't really complain about that. But that would be my one concern with Rakell.
I think that's fair. And having a guy that has 3 years left after this at 31 years old and a rising salary cap, there's immense value in that. If he can even do 3/4 of what he's doing right now with Sidney Crosby and the Penguins, $5 million for this two-way top six forward potentially, and he has 3 good years left. He'll be 34 when his deal expires.
Yeah,
this is a pretty big asset if any team's going to go out and look for a guy like Rakell. He hasn't gotten too much attention, but the asking price is pretty high. First in the blue chip prospect. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Rakell and what Kyle Dubas does with the rest of Pittsburgh. We saw Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor already out. There's been rumors about Erik Karlsson as well being moved this summer with the salary cap going up and a little more flexibility there. And then you also have some other guys on the roster too that could potentially be moved in the bottom six. So this Penguins team is going to be interesting to watch. They were in the playoff hunt for a little while. Midway through the season, and they've sort of tailed off at this point and should definitely be selling at this point and starting to recuperate assets. They have that first round pick that's top 13 protected now. So really excited to see what the Penguins do and possibly a new era of hockey in Pittsburgh, hopefully on the horizon.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are our underrated players, just highlighting a couple guys, especially guys who might get moved in the near future, but also some just players that are having really strong seasons on some good teams. So that's all we have for you for this week. Obviously, we have the Four Nations final coming up on Thursday. It should be, if Saturday's game was any indication, Thursday should be a lot of fun. And hopefully it's another great game and caps off what's been a really fantastic week for showcasing the NHL. And then of course we're back to regular NHL content after that. So thank you guys again for listening and for supporting the show. Make sure you follow on Apple and Spotify. You can access full videos on Spotify, but also on YouTube as well. And follow the Instagram for updates on new episodes, as well as seeing some clips and some bonus content on there as well. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next week.